Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
hmm
We're going to be jumping into something that I know a lot of you have been seeing in the headlines lately.
hmm
There's been some rising tensions around the Khalistan movement,
Yes.
and we're going to take a look at a specific incident that happened in London recently with India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar.
Right.
He was facing some protests there, and
Absolutely.
luckily we've got eyewitness accounts, we've got video footage,
Okay.
so we could really get like a front row seat to
hmm
this international incident. And I think it's going to open up some really interesting conversations about the role of symbolism in these political movements.
Yeah.
Freedom of speech versus security concerns and
Absolutely.
all these geopolitical dynamics that are at play.
I think that's what's so fascinating is how this seemingly isolated
Yeah.
event opens up a window into all these
Right.
complex
Exactly.
geopolitical dynamics and and the role of symbolism in
Yeah.
international relations.
Right. To set the scene for everyone, Jaishankar was leaving an event at Chatham House in London,
Got it.
and pro-Khalistan supporters were there. They staged a protest.
Interesting.
Eyewitnesses say that a man actually ran towards Jaishankar's car and tore down the Indian national flag
Wow.
right in front of London police.
That's a bold move.
Yeah, very bold.
Yeah.
We'll get into the police response a little bit later.
Okay.
But first, I'm really curious to hear more from you about the Khalistan movement itself. I know it's aiming for an independent Sikh state,
Yes.
but what's the deeper story there?
Absolutely. So the Khalistan movement is really rooted in the historical and cultural landscape of Punjab,
Okay,
which is the birthplace of Sikhism,
got it.
and a region that holds a really profound religious and cultural significance for Sikhs.
Okay.
And the movement itself kind of emerged in the 1970s and 80s, fueled by this really complex mix of religious, political, and social factors.
So many factors all coming together.
Exactly. And I think what's important to understand is that it's not a monolithic entity,
It's not-
There are all these different factions within the movement,
Okay.
each with their own approach, at different levels of support within the Sikh community.
So you have different groups who are advocating for different things
Exactly.
within this larger movement.
Right.
Got it.
So some advocate for peaceful means,
Okay.
while others have resorted to, more militant tactics in the past.
Hmm.
And even within the Sikh community itself,
Yeah.
there are varying perspectives on the idea of Khalistan.
Got it. So not every single person within the Sikh community is on board with this
Exactly.
idea.
Exactly.
Okay, that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
So this incident in London, it wasn't just random. It was
Yeah.
a very calculated,
Uh-huh.
symbolic act.
Yes.
Speaking of symbolism,
Yes.
we have some video footage of the flag being torn down.
Okay.
How should we, as informed citizens, how should we be approaching video evidence in this kind of context?
You're so right to bring that up.
Yeah.
I think in our day and age,
Mm-hmm.
we are bombarded with video content,
Oh, absolutely.
especially during these sorts of events.
Yeah.
And it's so crucial to be critical of that footage,
Right.
to really analyze what we see and also consider what we don't see.
What we're not being shown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So are there multiple videos from different angles?
Mhm.
What can we definitively conclude from the footage?
Yeah.
And what questions does it raise?
Okay.
So in this case, the video, if it's verified,
Yeah.
definitely captures the act itself,
Mhm.
but it doesn't tell the full story of the context.
Right, of course.
So it sparks questions about the police response, which you mentioned earlier.
That was something that really stuck out to me when I was watching the video.
Yeah.
Because the officers, they seem almost unresponsive to the flag being torn down.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one small detail, but it really stood out to me. How do you interpret that, and how might that, in action, how might that play into this larger conversation about law enforcement's approach to protests,
Right.
especially when these symbols are involved?
Yeah, it's an excellent observation.
Yeah.
It raises a lot of questions.
Mhm.
Were the police overwhelmed in that moment?
Yeah.
Did they make a tactical decision to not escalate the situation?
Right.
Or could this point to a systemic issue with how law enforcement approaches these protests?
Yeah.
Particularly when they involve these symbols of national identity.
Right, because a flag is a symbol, but it's also
Yes.
like in some ways it's just a piece of cloth, but then it's also this huge symbol of
Absolutely.
the nation.
Yeah, it's so loaded.
Yeah.
It reminds me actually
Also-
of the historical burning of the American flag
Okay.
during Vietnam War protests.
Yeah.
An act that really
Yeah.
deeply divided public opinion,
Yeah.
but ultimately led to all these legal battles
Interesting.
over the boundaries of free speech.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I wonder, thinking about those protests
Yeah.
and the legal battles that they sparked, I wonder how this incident in London could impact the relationship between India and the UK.
Right.
Because that's already kind of a delicate situation.
You've hit on such a crucial point.
Yeah.
Because acts like this,
Yeah.
even those with these contested interpretations, can have ripple effects on international relations.
Yeah.
India could very easily perceive this as an affront to its sovereignty,
Right.
leading to diplomatic tensions. And the UK is going to be under pressure
Of course.
to respond, trying to balance their commitment to freedom of expression with the need to maintain strong ties with India.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, social media plays a huge role in this.
Oh, yeah.
Amplifying these events.
Absolutely.
Shaping public opinion, adding another layer of complexity.
Yeah, and it's difficult to know what information to trust
Exactly.
when it comes to social media because there's so much out there.
It's a lot to sift through.
It really is.
Yeah.
So we started with what seems like a pretty straightforward event.
Right.
But I think this deep dive has shown all the different layers that are involved.
Absolutely.
We've got geopolitics, freedom of expression, the power of symbolism, the role of law enforcement, the impact of social media.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think that this one event could have so many far-reaching consequences.
It really is. And, I think this incident leaves us with so many questions to ponder. How will this affect that relationship between India and the UK? What precedent does the police response, or I guess the lack thereof, set for future protests involving symbols of national identity?
Right.
And how will this incident be used or even distorted in the online world to further specific agendas?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, and I think, as informed citizens, it's just so important to stay informed and to keep being critical, to keep exploring these questions with that critical eye.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
I think this was a really, really interesting conversation and definitely left me with a lot to think about.